Today I'm going to show you how I go about making a hollow form and segmented wood turning. There are quite a few advantages in doing a hollow form like this with segmented wood turning. One, if this was a solid piece of wood, you would have to hollow out the whole interior of this piece out of a very small opening. And that's going to take quite a bit of skill, quite a bit of effort, and quite a bit of time. With segmented wood turning, I can actually turn this in two separate pieces and then glue them together later after I get the interior and the exterior rough turned. So there is a big advantage in that. And another thing I like is I can mix woods. Now you can get some very beautiful wood out of a solid piece, a lot of figure, but I like the aspect where I can layer different shades of wood and create a form like this. So I will show you how I go about doing this.
Creating a segmented hollow form, there's not much of a difference between that and making a segmented bowl. You still need to plane your boards down to your required thickness, joint yourself a straight edge, and rip your boards to the required width for that particular ring of segments, and then start cutting your segments. The process is pretty much the same, it's just that you're creating essentially two bowls, and to make it into the hollow form, you're gluing those two halves together. I use an impact driver and a hose clamp to clamp my rings, but before I fully tighten that clamp, I'll place the ring in this press and press that ring completely flat, and then I will tighten the clamp the rest of the way. This ensures I have a completely flat ring for when I take it to the drum sander, and it will save me a lot of time. Look what we have here, a flat ring ready for sanding. I'm cutting some thin rings. I have showed this process before, but I had a little shop helper come out today and I did not see him before I started making the cut. But he just kind of ran away and didn't want to work anymore.
I just wanted to kind of show when you're gluing up, mistakes do happen. And I didn't notice it when I was sanding this, but there is a slight gap here. If you can see that gap in there, that's unacceptable. Normally when I glue these up, I use hose clamps. Since these rings were so small, I used rubber bands, and sometimes I don't get as good of a glue up, I don't feel like, with that, but with the smaller rings, sometimes it can be hard to get them clamped up with the hose clamps. But I'm going to show you how I'm going to fix this. And what I'm going to do is where this defect is, where it didn't glue up properly, I'm just going to cut through that and through this side, and then I'm going to glue these two halves together once I get them flattened with my sander. Now once I'll sand these two edges flat and I'll glue that back together so it'll be a perfect fit. The ring will be a little oblong because you're taking material out, so it'll still have the length here but won't be as wide here. So when I'm doing my glue up, I'll have to compensate for that to try to get this centered in the glue up.
I'm just sanding both edges of the ring to where it's a flat, straight edge. That way, when I glue them together, there will no longer be a gap.
Whenever I start gluing up my rings, I always like to make sure I have a clean, flat surface to start with. I use plexiglass on my tabletop. I have a whole thing covered. It is removable. I can take it up if I need to, but it's very easy for glue squeeze out or even drip any finishes that may drip on it. But let me show you how I'm going to fix this ring. All I'm going to do is, I've got this to where it's fitting together nice now. Like I said, you can kind of tell it is oblong now, so I will have to compensate for that when I do my glue up. But once it's turned, it's not going to be noticeable. You're not going to see that. It's still going to be round. Take care of a little bit of that squeeze out. I want to apply a little bit of pressure to this so that way I make sure I get a good seam there. That's why I don't really like using the rubber bands. I find them a little harder to clamp, and like I said, I don't feel like I get as good of a glue up with those, but with these small rings, it's just very difficult to use the hose clamps. But if you come across a mistake, that's how you fix it. When turning a segmented hollow form, I always glue it in two separate pieces and then glue those two halves together once I have the piece turned. But what I have to determine is where I want that separation to be. I have an 1/8 inch accent ring here, and I don't want it to be in those locations. Those have to remain at an 1/8 inch or whatever you choose to make that thickness. Because if I have to true up any edge and there's any variance in either one of these, the eye is going to pick that up very easily. So what I'm going to do is separate it right there and glue these two halves up. And if I have to true up this edge when I'm turning, the eye isn't going to pick up that difference. It's a thicker piece, so it's not going to pick that up. And once I get these turned, I'll glue the two halves together and then finish the hollow form. For this, I just apply one piece of painter's tape to my sled and not painter's tape, double-sided tape. And make sure I get my rough side up. This just kind of helps hold these small rings down so they don't get sucked up with the drum sander. You want to start very slowly around the edges where it's taped, because like these joints are very fragile and you don't want to snap them. So you get it to come loose. And then we're ready to start a glue up. I have the bottom half of the hollow form mounted in the lathe, and whenever I have dark bottoms on my pieces, I always like to insert a maple plug in the bottom of it, so that way when I sign my work, it'll stand out a little bit better. whenever you use dark wood, I use a wood burner to do that with, and it just doesn't show up on the darker woods as well. So it just gives a little accent at the bottom as well, but it gives me a place to sign my work. I'm going to go ahead and true this bottom up a little bit before I start cutting for the plug. I got it in my bowl jaw set, so I'll be able to, after I get it kind of roughed, turned, I'll be able to remove the tailstock and start cutting for my plug. I don't want to make this bottom too small because I do want a good surface to mount to while I turn the rest of this piece after I mount it to my glue block. But I just want to get it kind of roughed round. Now I mounted up a Forstner bit. This is the size I normally make my plugs. And on this Forstner bit, I did, because the Forstner bit will usually have a sharp point here to help get it started, to help center the bit. I did grind that down just a little bit. And this is basically the only thing I use this bit for. But I did grind that down so I don't have such a deep hole protruding. It wouldn't go into the bottom of the hollow form, but I just wanted more of a flat surface there. But I'll use this to cut my hole, and then I'll turn my plug. The hole that I drilled in the bottom of the hollow form was a 2-inch hole. Well, it wasn't really a hole, just a recess. So I've made this block about 2 1/4 inches. This gives me a little room to play with if I don't get it exact centered. But I do have it marked for centered, and I've got a little indentation right in the center of that. So I'll put that on my live center, and I'll just use a friction fit up against this chuck, and then I'll turn this round to where I can insert it into the bottom of the hollow form. We're getting real close. Now I do want to put this end, glue this in because this does have an indentation there. If I put it in like that, it could, when I turn the bottom, I could end up seeing that hole there, and I don't want to do that. I want to switch over to skew and just do a little scraping because I'm getting so close to that size that I need. Yeah, I made an attempt to go ahead and part that off with this one, and then that way, and then I'll sand this flat and glue block onto it. So let's make some shavings. That center's a little high. I'm going to put some lines in here so I can sand it, get it flat, and I think I've showed you this board before, so all I'm going to do is put it up against here and sand it down, sand it flat. See how we're doing. Yeah, it looks like we're pretty flat. I'm not seeing any more of the pencil lines. We'll get some glue on here and she should be good to go. Got quite a bit of glue there. I always like to use more. I mean, sometimes I probably use too much glue, but I would rather make sure the joint is staying together as opposed to have something come apart, because I tried to skimp on some glue. So again, I want to make sure I have my grain running the same direction. I don't want any cross grain. I don't think this would really split or anything, but I just don't want to take a chance. So I always like to have my grain of my waste block and the grain of my piece running the same direction. So I think we're pretty tight there. So we'll let that set up overnight, and then we can start turning this thing. I like to turn it to make sure I have clearance. A little bit of run out on this, but not too bad.
I was hoping to get more footage of me actually turning, but with the way I positioned the camera, you could just see the top of my head instead of me actually making the cuts. I'm kind of new to this, so I need to learn where to position the camera to where the camera can still see, but I am also able to see what I'm cutting.
Now, I showed this technique when I was doing the sanding blocks of getting it flat, but this also works for flattening the end of a bowl or end of a hollow form. So I'm going to go ahead and get that flat now. Now, the reason I done the top half first and I'm doing the bottom half last is because this is going to remain on the lathe here. And that way I'm not have to switch these back and forth. If I'd have done this one first, then turn the top half, this one would just have to get remounted on. So if I do the top half first and then do the bottom half, it just makes a little bit better flow for production. I will refine it more once I get the piece mounted on. So I can take this. Oh no, I'm pretty good right there. But yeah, once I get this glued on, then I'll kind of refine everything to its final shape. And then I'll turn this down to where I can put a finial on the top. Now I will leave this section here a little bit thicker, because after I get this all turned and I mount the new piece or mount the top to it, I will come back with a hollowing tool and clean up that glue line there and get it down to the thickness I want. But we'll go ahead and get the remainder of this down to the thickness that we're looking for, and then we'll be able to start gluing up. As you can see, I'm kind of undercutting this because this very edge is what I'm wanting to leave a little bit thicker. That way when I glue it up, I can clean that up later. All right, you got us a flat edge, and now I can mount up the bottom half or the top half and glue these two pieces together. Just do a few locations on this, that way I can kind of spin it around, make sure I slipped on that. Make sure I get a good glue surface or get it lined up properly. A little bit more glue. I think that should cover it pretty well. And we will let that set overnight and come back later after it's glued up and get the squeeze out taken care of here. Get any glue wiped off the bedways. After this is secured, the glue is dried, I can come back and completely refine this shape. I did leave it a little bit thicker than what I normally would do, like a bowl, but that's because I still have some more turning to do on the outside. So, but this kind of gives you an idea of how well these glue blocks work. You ought to give it a try sometime. They're pretty simple to make, and I like them. Okay, this piece has glued up overnight. The glue's all set. What my plan is to do is, this is the waste block here. I'm going to go ahead and part that off, and then I'm going to start shaping this. This is going to have more of a round shape to it coming around, and then I'll have a finial coming up from that that'll screw in. So right now what I need to do is get this parted off. So all right, I'm free. I've advanced the live center. It's not all the way. It's just there's a hole inside here, and I've just got it there as a little protection while I finish turning this piece here, finish turning the top of this. In case something crazy happens that comes off the lathe, this would catch it, but it's not really attached. It's not really hitting it that hard, so. I got 1 1/8 inch Forstner bit in here. I'm going to go ahead and drill out the hole. Then I'll be able to clean up. It'll give me access to the inside. I'll be able to clean up the inside of this seam and get the glue out of that. do some final shaping. And after I get the shape exactly the way I want, then I can cut my threads for my threaded insert. And we're coming along. Let's drill this hole. There, that gives me a little bit more secure holding with this, where take out some of the vibration. I'll be able to turn my speed up a little bit now that I feel like I've got it secured a little bit better.
Just starting to refine the shape to where it's pleasing to the eye. Trying to remove any high spots or low spots. You may see me use a pencil to mark any high spots and use my thumb to check, but just trying to make a nice smooth surface to where it's pleasing to the touch.
Got my hollowing tool set up with the laser set up to where it's just a little bit off of the cutter. I'm going to clean up that inside glue line. I don't like to leave that glue on the inside, so I will get that seam cleaned up. So I'm going to turn it down just a little bit so nothing crazy happens. Make sure everything's locked in place, and let's see about getting that cleaned up. And I'll turn this little nub off here, and I think that's probably all I'll do for today. I gotta do some sanding, then I'll cut my threads and
I've already done a video about this threading jig. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in this video about it, but I did want to kind of include a little bit of that so you can kind of see the process of how these urns get threaded.
all right, we got our threads cut. You see there's a little bit of a gap there. I just got to take a parting tool, because this cutter, when I'm cutting the threads, it butts up against the lip here. So I just need to take a parting tool and make a little notch there. Then that way it'll seat all the way down on my urn. All right, what I did off camera, I drilled a 3/8 inch hole into this piece, about halfway through it, put a tenon on this block, and then glued that in place. I'm getting ready to start turning the finial, and now for the bravery test. I'm going to start to part this off. That's about as brave as I'm going to get. There we go. Whoa, that was close. Didn't realize the threads went that far through, but all right. That could have ended badly. Wanted to show the setup I use to turn the bottoms of these hollow forms. Got this in the vacuum chuck right now. You can hear the vacuum pump running. I've got my steady rest on here. I position the steady rest to kind of help. I don't put it clear up here at the top. I put it kind of to where it'll help hold this into the vacuum chuck. I get quite a bit of pressure but with the vacuum chuck on this, but you're hanging out quite far, and so I want as much support towards the end of this piece as I can get. I'm going to do a little bit of shaping here. I'm going to clean up this bottom and kind of concave it just a little bit, and then sand it up, and should be ready to sign it and start putting some finish on. Let's see. You can see the bottom of the.
Just going to do a little sanding and clean up any tool marks and get the bottom nice and smooth so it's ready for my signature. There are dies that you can buy that will have your logo or your name on them, and you can heat those up and then just stamp it on the bottom of a piece. But for me, I prefer to use this wood burner and actually hand sign my work. I've spent a lot of hours creating this piece, and I just feel like it's worthy of taking a minute or two to actually hand sign the work. I've actually had customers come up and compare different pieces of mine. It's like, oh, the signature is a little bit differently. They're just curious if I have a stamp to where I just stamp my name. And a lot of them, I think, prefer that it is hand signed. But that's just my opinion.
Now I've got my name signed. I'm just going to kind of mount this back up and start applying some tung oil finish to it. I like tung oil. It seems like it's a very easy finish to apply. Pretty simple to get a smooth finish to it. And about 3-4 coats, you can get a pretty good gloss on it if that's the type of look you're looking for. That's what we're looking for. I just use a paper towel. Try to rub a generous amount on. Allow the wood to kind of soak it up. I've got a pretty good coat on this. I'm just going to kind of wipe off any excess that may be there. I'm not going to turn the lathe on. I'm just going to do this by hand. I don't want it to go flying. So I'll just apply some to this bottom here. Wipe off any excess. We'll put it to the side to dry. I'll get some finish on the finial here. And I want to wipe away any excess. We'll probably go ahead and turn the lathe on for this. All right, we'll let that, I don't have this all the way seated in there. It is loose. So if you see it flopping around, that's the reason why. But, all right, we'll just let everything dry and put another finish on it tomorrow, another coat of finish, and should be able to finish it up this weekend. Good deal.